All right, discussing again a little bit on the personal security and political development issues with early 2015. And I'd like to talk a little bit about, the possibility of newsworthy events taking place, and a lot of people talking about some laws coming in for new ID requirements and things like that. And there's a couple of things I'd like to discuss, especially with regards to what my general audience is, and if you feel this information is of value, great. If you don't, well, let me know that too. But what I wanted to discuss a little bit is things in relation to, let's say some sort of a terrorist event were to take place, and we look at the news from past events, especially here in the United States. The DC snipers were John Muhammad and Lee Malvo were self-radicalized and insane. Okay, this was two crazy people. I don't think they were really connected to any Al-Qaeda or jihadi type thing, but they were a self-motivated, self-functioning terrorist cell in reality. One of the mottos in the Patriot movement we came up with during that was, people died and John and Charles Moose lied. There were a lot of profiles put out. A lot of people took truthful, accurate information, forensic information, and information from the news, and instead of using that to find out what's going on, they used it to support pre-existing conclusions that they wanted to use as a justification for various actions they either wanted to carry out or wanted carried out on their behalf. For example, when it was discovered that the DC sniper was using an AR-15 type weapon, of course, the gun control people said, aha, this was proof that ABC. When a young black man, or actually it was a black child, was killed, somebody wanted to say, okay, this is proof that it's a militia of the KKK because it's this evidence and that evidence. And of course, so people wanted to spend a lot of time supporting the profiles that they had already existed. On an even worse note, I read a book that was written by one of the female FBI agents who was involved in the investigation, and she she had worked in the call center there, where people were calling in tips during shortly after every one of the shootings, and people that they felt were worthy of further investigation. And there were people raided, there were people who had guns in their face over this. There was a lot of people. In-laws, landlord-tenant issues, a lot of other issues came up. I forget the agent's name, but she wrote the book about this, and she explained that a lot of those false calls, a lot of those calls that were based on personal viciousness and hatred, severely hampered the investigation. They also started to point a lot of law enforcement resources in the wrong direction. What we didn't see at that stage was necessarily a knee-jerk fifth columnist type thing of the Alex Jones or Adam Kokesh flavor, where somebody just instantly concludes that it's a government conspiracy, wants to blame the government, and of course interferes with every possible element of the investigation. We start moving up to the Boston bombing, and that thing, the false accusations continued. I forget the guy's name, but he appeared on Al Jazeera. He was a former CIA case officer who was whoring out his credentials as a former CIA case officer to his audience at Al Jazeera and whoever was paying for the interview, to say that because the Boston bombing took place on Patriots Day, it had to be somebody in the Patriot movement or tax protest movement or somebody domestic. Not only was that a defamation of a lot of people, but it caused a lot of investigative resources to point toward people who were entirely innocent and point away from people who had carried out the attack. It became pretty obvious that the Tsarnaev brothers were involved when they went around killing cops, trying to get the guns off the cops. They were carrying out kind of a self-styled thing because they had not been fully supported by a network in the 1970s model where you had the KGB supporting a terrorist network that had trained and equipped people, and they were actually functioning as an adjunct of a government agency. The Tsarnaev brothers were much more independent than that, so they acted in a more independent fashion. But, we kind of think they did it. Were there other people present? Of course there were. Were there a lot of reasons why the government might not have told the entire truth right away? Of course. But the reality is somebody carried out that attack, and there's a lot of people who weren't involved. And it goes to one of the old sayings I've tried to repeat: if you don't want to be a suspect, don't act suspicious. Okay. Are you going to have opportunistic and hostile law enforcement people in situations like that? Of course you will. You're also going to have opportunistic and hostile, sometimes in-laws, sometimes ex-friends, ex-girlfriends, ex-boyfriends, whatever these people want to hold a grudge, and they want to solve that grudge and kill you with a phone call. It's happened to me several times. Yeah, fortunately, these days, a lot of law enforcement people are a bit jaded to those types of calls. A lot of intelligence agency professionals don't fully understand that. That's one of the reasons previously I've been an advocate of intelligence agency people having a law enforcement background, but sometimes that backfires because there's a lot of abusive dickheads who were failures and abusive dickheads at cops, and then they become failures and abusive dickheads on the international scene, and that's where things really, really get fucked up, because it fucks up on a much larger scale. If you are in a situation where you're dealing with somebody, and I posted a video a few years ago in regards to companies. It was a company policy type thing we're putting together for people to do home service call workers that do installations in homes. How do you deal with somebody who is hostile and legally armed and being confrontational? First of all, you'll want to try and de-escalate the situation. Second, extract yourself from the situation. De-escalate the situation, extract yourself from the situation, and report it. Remember, this other guy, he figures he has the legal upper hand. And if you remember also what I said, if you don't want to be a suspect, don't act suspicious. But at that point, you may need to become the accuser. You may need to report this thing. I'm not saying necessarily report it to the same agency that's committed the offense, but report it to somebody. Create documentation for the incident. Let some people know. Lastly, carry out retaliation. Do carry out retaliation against the abusive individuals. And I said abusive individuals. When it becomes to whom it may concern at the entire organization, I think it dilutes it. It doesn't necessarily get the message across. You need to call out the individuals in some way so that there's some resolution to it, or at least other people become aware of this and will know to look out for that pattern in the future. Retaliation could be legal, it could be other things, but you need to carry it out. Now, I dealt with some of those types of situations in the military. If somebody was hostile, if somebody was being particularly hostile and interfering with our unit because they had some little petty authority somewhere or on guard duty somewhere and are using that search authority to start breaking stuff into barracks or something like that. If somebody, like, let's say from another company, was doing guard duty in the barracks and the guy wants to come in on field day and start trashing stuff because he had the authority to that day, we report it through our own chain of command, and then we retaliate against him. Of course we will. We'll make sure the guy gets in trouble. My unit, if the MPs fucked with us, we fucked with them back. We did that because there was one unit that I was in. We were in charge of our commander was previously the commander who was in charge of their motor pool. So they fucked with our people. We made sure that they weren't passing the inspections on taking care of their vehicles. There was a little crack or a tear in a seat on one of the patrol cars. The individual officers got charged for it. And if they cried about it, they were told why. So, hey, you fucked with somebody in motor T, so now this is what you get. You're going to get fucked with. In the civilian world, you can file lawsuits, you can have protests, you can do these things. They probably should happen, especially if they happen in the wake of a terrorist attack where they should have a pretty good idea who's doing it. Okay, political correctness is one thing, but being able to go through surveillance photographs and honest investigative techniques, perpetrators tend to get identified fairly quickly. The other thing is that the real players in that game, they understand how it works, okay? they're probably either going on a suicide run or they're trying to get away. There's no reason to act as a de facto fifth columnist by interfering with an investigation. And that also means that the cops need to not act as a de facto fifth columnist by screwing with people who they should damn well know are not involved in a crime or the investigation. You shouldn't be taking the focus off of what the mission is. If he's taking the focus off the mission, he's a danger to himself, he's a danger to the organization, he's a danger to the mission. That needs to be known, it needs to be reported, and it needs to be resolved, because these things may continue to happen. And as they continue to happen, they need to be resolved. You can't have people abusing the opportunity to go and screw with people because something may have happened.